It's my pleasure to welcome you this evening. Before we begin, just a bit of housekeeping. This would be a good time to silence your cell phones. Also, we have tonight's books behind the register, and after the event, Michael will be signing right here, and we'll form a line along that direction. And also, if you could help us out by folding up your chairs after the event, we'd be grateful. And while I have you, just a note to take a look at our website to see all the classes, trips, and events that we have going on this summer. Also, we have a big off-site event with Zadie Smith coming up. Lots of good big events at other off-site venues, so please take a look at the website. And we have flyers around the store as well. Also, we are recording, so when, and it's a big crowd, which is great to see. So when it comes time for the Q&A, if you don't mind stepping up to the microphone right there, that would be wonderful. So I'm thrilled to introduce Michaele Weissman tonight for her memoir, The Rye-Bred Marriage. I know Michaele from the Writers' Room in D.C. If you don't know about the Writers' Room in D.C., please ask me or Michaele about it afterwards. It's a wonderful writing community in Tenley. And I got to kind of watch Michaele write this for a couple of years, and it was such a pleasure and really kind of a wonder to finally to see it as a book and to get to know her in a completely different way on the page. And I finished reading it this weekend and can tell you that it's a wonderful, charming book. It's a nice hybrid of rye bread and marriage as advertised, and as well as a rich history of Latvia during World War II. Kirkus has called it a charming, insightful meditation on the intersection of love, family, and food. Michaele's work has appeared in the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, Forbes, and dozens of other publications. She's also the co-author of A History of Women in America and wrote on her own God in a Cup, a travelogue and exploration of the specialty coffee scene. And she's also a beloved instructor here at Politics and Prose. Michaele will be in conversation with Sally Swift. She's the co-creator and managing producer of The Splendid Table. The radio program, podcast, and website have been in the vanguard of the movement for food quality and conscientiousness for nearly 3 decades. Swift is the co-author of the best-selling The Splendid Table's How to Eat Supper, Recipes, Stories, and Opinions from Public Radio's award-winning food show, and its sister book, How to Eat Weekends. Please help me welcome Michaele and Sally Swift.
Put this down. You want it down? Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Hi. Wow. What a great crowd.
Great to see you. My bar mitzvah or something. Everybody I've ever known.
You need your microphone because we're recording.
Yes,
Really
ma'am.
great to
Sorry
see
about
everyone.
that.
Thank you for coming out and supporting this independent bookstore.
Yeah.
Right?
Right.
Right. Michaele, I want you to introduce the characters in the book, and the first one is your husband, John.
Okay. Well, this is...
There are 2 characters.
Right. So I was 20 years old and feeling very sparky and went to a party in Cambridge, as one does, and saw like the cutest guy in the room and made a beeline to him. And 15 years later, we were married. But there he was, and I met this incredibly compelling fella, and he came with a story from the minute I met him. And the story was Latvia, and the story was John was born a minute before World War II started in Latvia. And Latvia, during the war, as people know, were 3 times invaded. And in 1944, when the Russians came back, a very large number, I think it's 100,000 educated Latvians fled because they knew what was coming for them. And John was a teeny, he was 5 years old, and they fled. All these Latvians, this part just stunned me, they fled to Germany because they knew the war was ending, and they weren't going east, so they had to go west, and they did. But those were very dramatic. That was very dramatic flight. And then John's family wound up at a DP camp in southwest Germany near the French and the Swiss borders, which is kind of, and he had this Grimm's fairy tale childhood, this magical out of time childhood in a place that, well, it's just Grimm's fairy tale. You have to go there to see it. This village is called Egg, and it had 12 houses. And there was a larger village near there where there were many Latvian refugees, but he lived in this tiny, magical little place. And then when he was 10, his family, they emigrated here. And I say in the book, and it's true, his childhood was over because for all these emigres, then the children carried the weight of everything, as is always the case with immigrants and emigres. And so he and his brother both have PhDs from Carnegie Mellon because that's what was necessary to begin a new life. And this story, it means a lot to me to have told this story, which is both very individual, I think, but also I have been very thrilled to discover speaks to many Latvian families. And it's a story that really isn't known. It's a tiny country, and it's funny that this oddball American Jewish woman is telling the story, but here I is.
Now, the other character in the book is the bread, and so I do.
What about me?
I do want you to. Some of you have had a chance to taste it, which is great. So you get where we're starting. This brown,
heavy,
super intense, heavy, durable bread.
Right.
So tell us about the bread and when you first tasted it.
Oh, the first time I tasted it was the second time John and I dated when I was definitely in the mood to get married, which I wasn't when I was 20. I was in my early, I was fess up, I was 35. And John took me to meet his mother, and we had dinner, and of course, she made borscht with meat, very different from the borscht I knew, and but it was really about her homemade rye bread. And I must say, I was somewhat stunned by this bread.
It was a test.
It was a test. It was a test. I recognized it as a test, and I was, oh, look who's here. Oh, my God. I was someone stunned by the bread because I didn't like it, and it wasn't pretty. What I didn't know is that my mother-in-law's oven wasn't hot enough to really do what this bread is supposed to do, which is form a dark, rich crust that will protect the insides and all that. But also, I had an assimilated palate. My idea of being upwardly mobile and through my own family was, Italian food, and Northern Italian at that. And so, But anyway, the guy was cute, and I was ready to get married, and so I lied and said I loved it.
And you passed the test, obviously.
Clearly I did.
You did. Now, clearly you started working on this book, and it was really about rye bread. I mean, that was the path that you were headed, and you kept writing and writing and writing around and around and around, and I kept going. And so when did you discover that it really was about your marriage?
And yes, and yeah. Well, I had written a book about coffee, and I had written that book by following these very interesting young guys around the world, and just recording everything they said. And what I found out as a reporter, you just stay longer than anybody, and things will happen, and then you write them down, and then it makes good copy, and eventually you've got a book. And it was actually, I wrote that book very fast because that publisher was stupid, but that's a different story. And so I thought, well, I'm going to write this book, and John and I are going to go to Latvia together. He's going to translate. Yeah, he's my husband, but we're going to go meet these bakers, and we're going to interview people, and we're going to do all this stuff, and we're going to run around and taste a lot of bread. And then I'll come home and write about what we learned, or what I learned, and in 18 months I'll have a book. So I came home and wrote about what I learned and who I met. And my agent, my lovely, beautiful agent, who I wish she were here tonight, but she just said, Michael, I don't think you're there yet. And I wasn't there yet for quite some time. And it was the not working that taught me I had to go different and deeper. And also, it slowly occurred to me, I know a guy in California who has written 10,000 pages on the history of bread. Now, it's not just rye bread, and he's not ready to publish. There is a history and a literature of bread that there was no way I was going to master. You know, writing about coffee, there were like 10 or 12 books I had to read. Bread, it slowly dawned on me, I am not a baker. I am a writer. And I have a pretty good palate, but, you know, and I write about food, but I'm not a chef. But what I am is, you know, I was teaching writing to psychoanalysts. I'm interested in the human heart. That's who I am. I'm interested in the intersection of history and psychology and story. So eventually I found my way as a writer to that intersection. But I had always been a journalist. And I had always written about other people. And even though I think that my profiles had some depth, and, you know, you're at this level. And so learning how to go to a deeper and deeper level takes a lot of time and practice.
And that was John, is whether your deeper level was your marriage.
Yeah, well, it was understanding. It was understanding John. He became, and that's so fascinating, isn't it? We'd already been married for decades, and I thought I understood. And then I realized, you hear your husband or your wife's, your spouse's story, and you hear it once or twice or 3 times or more times than you care to hear it, and you think you know it, and you think you know them. And what you know is literally your projection, and you don't know them because you have not given them the kind of attention that it takes to write and to go and to separate the subject from yourself, so that you can really begin to understand it. And that, I thought I was psychologically very acute to begin with, of course. And coming to grips with what I didn't understand or hadn't understood, or that you're married to someone, but they are not an object. They, I said this in the book, and I really feel this, that your other is as real to himself as I am to me. And I know, and that's a shocking thought.
You have a wonderful piece in the book about talking about when you two, it was before you were married, or it was right when you were married, and John, who had traveled a ton and spoke French and
German and Russian,
take him anywhere.
Latvian,
He had an excellent palate, bought the right wine,
looked good,
looked
really
really
looked good.
Assuming you assumed that the Latvian was going to go away and all the French was going to get elevated in your life together.
Yes.
And what happened?
Well, he didn't turn French. I was so naive and stupid, I would say, that I thought John would marry me and he would become like me. And he thought John would marry me and that I would become like him. And both of us are stubborn as hell, and neither one of us really became like the other one. And I was, in my mind, I was marrying this glamorous European who had just come back. When I met him the first time, he had just come back from a postdoc in Paris. I mean, really. And this was so much better than guys who, Belmont, Massachusetts, and played golf. And so that was it. And so yes, and the other thing that And he bought wine by the case. I had never met a person who bought wine by the case. I thought that was so fabulous. So of course he was going to become French, but he became more Latvian every year. Well,
Yeah.
had to be himself. God damn it.
Right. You, I want to talk to you. So you write in this book, you are very honest about marriage, and very, you're very honest about marriage and very brave to write about it in the way that you have. You have a chapter called Married Hatred, which is wonderful. It's a short chapter, but can you talk a little bit about why you write beautifully and painfully about, being mean to each other when you're married, and how, you know you're doing it and you can identify it, but you keep doing it, and what that is. And the way you write about it, Michael, I can almost taste metal when I read some of the things, it's just so truthful. And I'm very interested in why you wanted to include that in this book.
Okay. So I was this big mouth girl growing up in Belmont, Massachusetts, which is a very pretty suburb with very pretty houses. And I knew, I was really young. I knew that everybody lied about everything, and I couldn't understand why. And it's that cognitive dissonance that bright children have. And my parents weren't definitely not horrible people by any means, by most means, but most of the time. But, I lived with that people lied, and I hated it. So I carried that. I didn't know how much I carried that into my writing, but I did. And then also I had this interest in psychoanalysis. So in psychoanalysis, psychoanalysts talk very much about love and hate as co-joined, as twins, and that you can't be attached to someone or love somebody without having your hatred emerge. And it's just part of it. And so I kind of was educated to that. I am a graduate of a non-degree granting program called New Directions that was for scholars and writers and psychoanalysts. And then I taught there. So I'm very comfortable actually with accepting of the complexity of attachment. And you never know. Did I know that I was going to? Then you set to work on a memoir, and you don't know where you're exactly going to go with it. But it was very important, because one of the things that I wrote about this marital hatred is, and that this little story happened before we were actually married, and we were going to the Latvian Midsummer Festival in New Hampshire at PSL. Latvian people are here.
Nothing French.
And nothing French.
French.
But charming. But we were going there, and John had a new yellow Subaru, and I was a New York girl who hadn't driven for 15 years. So, and it had been raining in New Hampshire, and then it had cleared up, and John had to park the car along a hillside, and there was a ditch, a watery ditch, and a ditch full of water. And John said, "You have to direct me into this part, so I can park along this hill." And I got out of the car. I'm left-handed. I have no spatial imagination. And I hadn't driven in 15 years, but he said, but the first wife was really good at that sort of thing. So he knew that I could do it. And of course I directed him right into the ditch. And he was so furious. He looked at me with this betrayal. And what was in his eyes was hatred. And I don't think I had ever been close enough to another. I had dated a lot, but I had never been close enough to a man to go through that, to see how extremely disappointed and how passionate his disappointment was. It was hatred. And so that it burned itself into my imagination. And the other side, which I think is sweet, is that John is I hate saying this in front of him, but anyway, John is such a loving person. And there were so many loving stories. And there are so many ways in which he's always been kind to me. And it somehow, but these differences between us are a big constant in our relationship. So it was very important to be able to express the yin and yang of that.
You also had stepchildren, which I don't think we talk very much about in our lives, about what it's like to blend families together. And tell us about that.
Well,
and how Latvian were they?
Well, that's what's interesting about that is that my stepkids both spoke Latvian. They were my mother-in-law helped care for them when they were little. They spoke Latvian. They went to Latvian school. They were very Latvian identified. But their mother was American, and they were American kids. And so in some ways, there was this charming, not cruel, sort of loving alliance of the girls and I lovingly teasing John and making fun of him. And in some ways, they were, in some ways, those were the easiest.
Making fun of his Latvianness.
And foreignness.
His foreignness.
And that he would, you wore that helmet on your bicycle to drive into Cambridge, and and how many weird ways, it looks like you've got half a soccer ball on your head, and there was a lot of joking and a lot of jokes about, and I love that because I love the joking. What I will say about stepmothering, there's many. It's all relationships are complicated. Let's put it that way, but. I think that the way in which I screwed up often was just trying to be so perfect and overdoing things. And, there's that hunger to be the good parent because you're not the parent. And, I don't know, it must have been, my stepdaughters must have been well in their 40s when I realized that I'm not their mother. And it's okay. It's really okay, and I can be attached to them, and it's okay, but I'm not their mother. But I think that I struggled with that.
Can we talk a little bit about scarcity and how that marked your husband and how that has been a constant in your life together?
And I think about this all the time. Yes. Long story short, people who've been hungry or the children of people who've been hungry are imprinted with a response to resources that somebody like me who was brought up, I was born after World War II, and my father was home from the Navy, and it was this incredibly optimistic moment in America. And I grew up with that, classic baby boom. There's everything. I was not such a big radical, but we can overthrow America because there's so much. If we overthrow America, there'll just be more and more and more and more. And that's my, I hope that I have grown a little beyond that, but that is the mentality in which I grew. And so understanding John's horror at waste, and this is an ongoing struggle between us, I must say. It's just, and it's something that I would actually like to write about more, because I think there's a universal, there are people who've been hungry, or their parents were hungry, and there are people who don't have that in their head. And I think that it's really work to understand each other.
There's a poignant moment in the book with John's mother and Noah, who was your baby, your new baby, at feeding time. Will you tell that story?
Yeah. So I have my first and only birth child at the age of 36, and I am smitten, and we are foodies, and so it's summertime, and I'm going to serve Noah dinner. My mother-in-law was outside, I guess, sunning herself. She really loved the sun, and so what did I do? Foodie that I am, I poached a little bit of fillet of sole and fresh vegetables, and so I start him off with a piece of rye bread for the teeth and peanut butter, and then this poached fillet of sole and vegetables, and it's all on his. We finished the meal up with must have been sweet potatoes, because it's all, in the little cup of sweet potatoes. It's in his hair. It's all very spiky, and he's got really good hand-to-eye coordination. He is feeding himself. I don't feed him, and he is feeding himself, and he is feeding his body with this food, and he is having a blast. And then when he's finished, I pick him up because I am going to give him a bath. And so, and what I used to do is, it was summer, and so he'd be in a diaper. So it didn't matter.
You could hose him down.
Right, exactly.
Totally.
And my mother-in-law came in, and she saw this scene, and she came over to him when he was done, and she said, this Latvian, Ed, she's in his face, wanting him to eat more. And, I hate that kind of coercion. And, American girls, you don't force people to eat because they're, we're all worried about being fat. So don't force them to eat. That's terrible. So I get mad, and I pick him up, and I'm carrying him upstairs, and I look back, and she's got her face in this tray full of these foods. And I pick up the tray, and I dump it in the garbage, and I say, I forget what I said, and she said, with great dignity, "It's nutrition." And I could cry now, and I so didn't understand. And, and that, and I guess I said, I hated her for that, but I hated myself more. And I think that's probably a good thing.
Right. There was some growth there.
Yes, exactly.
So we're going to take questions in another minute. I've got one more question, and then we'll open it up to you guys. So again, go to the mics if you can. Since we're recording it, would be great. So Michael, how long did it take to write this book?
Oh.
I'm sorry. I know that's a terrible question.
I guess it took close to 10 years.
Okay, that seems normal.
Right.
How do you look at your marriage in a different way at the end of this?
Well, there's things I understand that I didn't understand. But the real thing is...
Your mic's bad.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. The real thing is that I really think that marriage is developmental. And so, of course, I look at John and myself and our marriage differently because, all this time, this 10 years that I was writing this book, this tapestry was unweaving itself, the story of our lives, and we're changing because that's just inevitable.
But you're comfortable with that, because I think lots of people aren't comfortable in marriages with the change and the long arc of things. I think that's a very unusual.
Well, let's say when you spend 10 years working on a memoir, you learn a lot of things, and that's one of the things I learned, that you can't. It just keeps rolling. It just keeps rolling. It's just the essence of life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you have a question?
I do.
Excellent.
Thank you very much for your fascinating talk about your marriage and your own upbringing. And it was going back to that upbringing that stimulated my question, because you said something that really surprised me, if I heard you correctly. Talking about when you were young, you said you learned that everybody lies. Is that? And I wondered how you'd come to that feeling about the environment you were living in, and what effect that had on you.
Well, in short, I think it made me a writer because the hunger. So what I realized is that what I felt and what people acknowledged feeling were different. And in that's what I meant by everybody lies. And then I also had this, that's sort of like everybody lived in a pretty house. And then, you know, gradually you realize that your friend Bobby's parents are going through the most awful divorce and that he will never get over. And, but the houses are pretty, and it, you know, is a very this is the early 60s when I was in high school, and it's a very buttoned down time. And, people really didn't acknowledge who they were or what they felt. And I just kind of stored that up. And I think it shaped the person I became. It took me a while to know what to do with that, by the way. I did a lot of, you know.
So your motivation then, in part, to be a writer was wanting to put your vision of truth on the table, as it were, or be more open than you'd perceived other people to be in your younger years. And
I think it's I think it's really the first that I wanted to put. I wanted to say, this is the way it looks to me, and it's just but I think that is the impulse why anyone makes anything, really.
well, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Yeah, great.
I'm blessed to be your neighbor.
Aw.
First of all,
You're like in on the rye bread.
We're getting there.
Direct line. Yeah.
I am really impressed at your ability to look in the mirror and at self-analysis. That is not easy for many people, and to share that. Talking about sharing, religious proselytizing sometimes drives me crazy.
Yeah.
Political proselytizing sometimes drives me crazy. You all proselytize about rye bread. At our neighborhood gatherings, anywhere and everywhere. First of all, I want to encourage it because it's a beautiful thing to be proselytizing about. And next, I want to ask you, where does the rye bread movement go from here?
Oh, well, actually, there is
one.
There is a rye movement, and John has a young partner now who's based in New York, and you know, rye, the grain of rye is extremely good for the soil because it holds, it prevents erosion. It has deeper roots than wheat, and it's extremely rye is much more nutritious than wheat. Sorry to say, which doesn't mean we don't love wheat, and John loves a good baguette, and so do I. But and John is sitting next to Mark Furstenberg, so I mean, I ask you. So, but there is a movement because it's tied up with the whole effort to create sustainable agriculture in states that are not known for agriculture, like New York. New York is growing a lot of rye,
Wow.
and there's a whole movement that way to, and so I mean, I'm not being super articulate, but I think there is first of all, there's a growing awareness of people about nutrition, about wanting to eat healthy, about and then also loving the earth and taking care of it. So I do think there's a future for rye, and not just in whiskey.
Good. Although I wouldn't knock the whiskey
Right.
either.
Anyone else? Yeah, thanks.
So I'm so glad we met. I met John and Michael in yoga class.
Right.
But I do have a question. I was wondering when and how you learned to love rye bread, this rye bread.
Okay. Well, this is actually a funny story. So, blah 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 blah. I mean, I started writing about food, and John and the former Soviet Union collapsed, and John started ordering bread from Latvia for his own purposes, and then for our purposes. And so, first of all, this bread is very delicious.
But he was doing it because he was starting to sell it, or
No,
he
no,
was bringing it in for you guys.
No,
Okay.
not
Right.
right. At first, it was just for personal, and then he had a friend at the University of Maryland who was sort of entrepreneurial, and he said we should import this stuff, and John started to import it. But now this is the part that's actually about Sally, and I don't know that I've ever told you this. So I was writing about food, and John was importing this bread. And of course, I think I'm so independent and brave to have negative thoughts and blah, blah, and all that. But the bread is nice. I mean, I like it, but I'm not crazy about it. And then, but I had started writing about food, and I met all these food writers, one of whom, and I met Sally, which was one of the happy experiences of my food writing career. And we'd invite people to dinner. And when I saw the way real foodies, whose palates I really respected, responded to this bread, Miss Independence-minded said, oh, maybe I should think about this more deeply. So you actually played a part.
Funny.
Yeah.
Funny. Can you come up to the mic just because we're recording? Sure. Don't worry.
It's so interesting, Michael, that the mind and taste are so, they feed on each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hi, Michael.
Hi, Christine. I've known her since she was 12.
Probably. Which came first, the book or the bread company?
Oh no,
Black
no,
Rooster.
No, Black Rooster came first. I mean, first the bread company. First they were importing it from Latvia, and then the dollar collapsed, or I don't remember, but the rate of exchange changed, and it was no longer financially made any sense to import. And so John, this is one of the things I love about John. I mean, he just went and started working the phones and found a baker and said, did you ever make rye bread without wheat? And he said no. And John said, well, it's not that hard, or whatever he said. But he's very, very, when John believes in something, he will work you till you believe it. So anyway, they started a company. And around that same time, I had started writing about food because the writing trade had changed, and you needed to specialize in order to get published, which wasn't, each one of my 4 books is about something totally different. You didn't used to have to specialize, but the last 2 are about food, actually. So there was a convergence there, but the company came first.
Thank you. Any other questions? No? Nope. Okay, we're going to call this a wrap, and you can, one more. They're percolating.
Yeah, it did percolate. So this is totally different.
You're right.
So we met through you swimming.
Right, another of my passions. Yes.
Another of your passions.
Yes.
With my wife
Yeah.
for years now. And then I returned to the pool several years ago and started swimming. I never liked swimming, although I was pretty good at it as a child. But I never liked swimming. Why? Because I got bored. So I swim now, and I swim maybe at most for an hour. You do too, so does my wife. But then I have to train myself to do something while I'm swimming, because your arms are doing things, but your mind's doing nothing. So you got to think about other things, and what do you think about when you're doing that? And I know what I think about. What do you think about when you swim?
Oh, I write.
You write the book.
We're right, and I solve problems. And it's so interesting. I love that you asked that. It's because people say, "Don't you listen to music? Don't you have earphones?" No, because I solve problems, and memories come, and then the hard part is memories are tough because they come and they go. But literally solving problems. How am I going to put this together to make this work? Or it's the aerobic nature is very. swimming is so boring, but it's so boring that it's a meditation, and you're breathing as you swim. And the breathing is a meditation, and the meditation brings all this a rich kind of thinking. And
What's the best thing you've solved swimming?
oh boy, I don't have it's much more, I was at my computer today, and I looked at this paragraph, and I looked at this, this doesn't work, or this sucks. And it's much more like, it's not. I wish I had a dramatic story. It's not the drama. It's the solving little problems.
Yep.
Hi, my name is Sarma, and I'm a diplomat here from Latvia. I'm at the
Oh my
Embassy of
God.
Latvia.
I'm thrilled to have you here.
Thank you. Liana from the Embassy is here as well. As you can imagine, we're all huge fans of rye bread, and we're so excited about this book. And sometimes Mr. Mangals also spoils us with the gift of rye bread when he's. But I was just curious, did writing and also publishing this book, so publicly, did it change your marriage? Did it, and did your husband, was he always supportive, and how did he feel, and how has your relationship evolved because of the book?
Shall I tell the truth? There are men with egos in the world and men without egos. And I'm married to one with an ego. And if you tell John, so I think, first of all, I would not have written the book that I wrote and published it. John has read every iteration and has given notes every inch of the way. And I would not have written this book and published it if it was objectionable. Interestingly, the pieces that mattered to him the most were the stories about his parents in Latvia. When I talk about possible complicity, his parents were in no way complicit. But I talk about these issues in Eastern Europe, and it was incredibly important to him that I get it exactly right and say it the exact words. The part about his identity, John has this joke that he's going to travel with me this year, and I'm going to pick him up and say, but it isn't like that at all. It is much more that, the book really is an honoring. And even though I have wondered, Latvians are such private people often, and I have wondered a great deal, especially men, but women too, how it would be to read something that is so not Latvian. And there's a book list wrote in one of the reviews that came out this week from a thing called Book List, which is for libraries. And I thought the reviewer was just lovely, and she or he, I'm not sure which, said, there's a question that Algonquin put on the book, which I can't say I'm crazy about, how I, found happiness with a man. I blah, 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 whatever it
You
is.
need to know the subtitle of your
Yeah.
book.
Oh, I need to
How
know.
I Found Happiness with a Partner I'll Never Understand.
Right. So and Algonquin added that because as a marketing tool, they wanted people to be in a bookstore and know what the book is about. But of course, it's a little crude in my estimation. Although, please, the best publisher you could ever have. I've really been so blessed. But anyway, but so this reviewer said by the end of the book, that both of them understand each other. And I thought that was so unbelievably beautiful and touching, because there's a scene at the end of the book. I came back from being in France for 5 weeks, and I thought I was going to finish the book at this writer's retreat. Writers' retreats, there's a lot going on and a lot of drama. And I did make progress, but I didn't finish the book. And I came back, and it was like, I'm never going to finish this book, and I'm never going to live up to my blah, blah, blah. And, the complaining and fear also. And John put his arms around me and said, don't say mean things about yourself. So, you know, and I guess maybe why the book works and maybe why people can tolerate me talking about hatred is that I really believe in love. And I don't believe in perfect love, but I really believe in love, and I really believe in attachment, and I really believe in family. And so, though in some ways the book might be radical, in other ways it's not radical at all.
Thank you, everyone. Michael will be up here signing. Grab a book. Come on up. Thank you.